For the first time in their franchise's history, the Toronto Raptors are going to the NBA Finals. After years of struggles, the Raptors finally came to relevance at the right time. And today I'm going to give you some brief history on how the Toronto Raptors have made it to this point. In the 1995-96 NBA season, the NBA had two new expansion teams. First out in the West, the Vancouver Grizzlies, and out East, the Toronto Raptors. At the time, this is really good for the league. Having two international teams was really unique, and it was a good start for international play to this day now. The very first GM for the Raptors was Isaiah Thomas. In his time as executive, he's proven to be bad at those positions. The Raptors that season were pretty bad as well. They finished with a 21-61 record, but on the bright side, Damon Stoudamire ended up winning Rookie of the Year. He was averaging way over 20 points a game. Luckily for the Raptors as well, too, they had a little bit of luck on their hands because they were able to draft Tracy Mcgrady, a prospect straight out from high school. He showed a lot of potential in his rookie season. Though he only averaged 7 points per game for the Raptors, he scored over 20 points twice, and he had games with over 10 points about 17 times. They also had Chauncey Billups. He played well for the Raptors, but they ended up getting rid of him. But finally, some luck was really on the Raptors side because fast forward to the night of the 1998 NBA Draft, the Raptors changed the trajectory of their franchise, trading Antawn Jamison for Vince Carter, the athletic wing from the University of North Carolina. Vince, coming into the league, was already one of the best athletes. The GM, Glenn Grewald, had said he was convinced that Vince Carter was the best player in the draft. And boy, was he right. Despite the NBA lockout season, which was only 50 regular season games, Vince Carter had showed how good of a player he was. He averaged over 18 points a night and won Rookie of the Year. Vince had the Raptors fans excited for having him and his cousin, Tracy Mcgrady, on the team. The next season, they both came back even better. Tracy averaged over 15 points a game, and Vince Carter averaged over 25 a night. He also gave us the greatest dunk contest in NBA history, but that was the problem with the Raptors. Vince Carter was getting all of the spotlight, while Tracy Mcgrady was really in the shadows of Vince. And it did somewhat decline Tracy McGrady's development having Vince Carter on the team. The Raptors ended up making the playoffs for the first time in their franchise's history. They ended up getting swept by the Knicks, but they were supposed to have a bright future because they had T-Mac, but he had his own plans. Tracy McGrady ended up signing with the Orlando Magic, a team pretty famous for not being able to keep their superstar players. We all know what happened next to him. He could never get the Orlando Magic past the second round of the playoffs, and he ended up saying later on in his NBA career that leaving Vince and the Raptors was one of the biggest mistakes he ever made in his career. Moving on, though, from that to the 2001 season, the Raptors actually came back a better team without Tracy McGrady. Vince came back averaging even higher numbers. The Raptors were top 5 offense and a top 15 defense in the league. And the crazy part is the next highest scorer on the team, Antonio Davis, only averaged 13.7 points a game. And the Raptors, they also won 47 games. And for the first time in their franchise's history, the Toronto Raptors made it past the first round, beating the Knicks in 5 games. And then they played against the Philadelphia 76ers, and they were 1 win away from going to the Eastern Conference Finals. This moment is pretty famous because Vince Carter, if he made that shot, that could have happened. Sadly, though, from that point on, the Raptors fell off really fast. Even though Vince had become Toronto's hero and they really embraced Vince Carter, they never put a good team around him. Vince, when they drafted Chris Bosh, was already demanding a trade, and he wanted a trade so bad that he averaged 15 points a game so he could be shipped out, and he was. He was traded to the New Jersey Nets. For a while, the Raptors hated Vince, but like any other star player, he wanted something better in his NBA career. He wanted to actually win and compete for NBA championships. Now there was a new man in town. In the 2003 NBA draft, the Toronto Raptors selected Chris Bosh. After coming off a great rookie season, there was a lot of high hopes for Chris Bosh, and he did live up to those expectations. In his sophomore season, he stepped up his game, averaged 16.8 points, and shot 46% from the field. Also, despite the Raptors only winning 33 games, he still had a lot of help from Jalen Rose, who was the team's leading scorer. Fast forward 2 years later, the Raptors finally made the playoffs again, for the third time in their franchise's history. Bosh was only 22 years old, and he was an all-star, the best player on his team. But once again, what have the Raptors been messing up with the whole entire time? Their star players. They could never really put a great supporting cast around Chris Bosh. The next highest scorer on his team at that time was TJ Ford, who was only averaging 14 points a game. The funny part was they ended up playing against Vince Carter in the playoffs that season, and they ended up losing in 6 games, which is somewhat impressive. The next year was a down year for Chris Bosh and the Raptors. At this time, it's the 07-08 NBA season, and the Raptors had a 41-41 record. In the last season before that, they had a 47-35 record. So they definitely did drop a good amount in the standings. Chris Bosh, of course, was still an all-star, and the Raptors, they did make the playoffs, but they lost to the Orlando Magic in 5 games. Another first-round playoff exit for the Raptors. For things, that was the last time Chris Bosh ever made the playoffs as a Toronto Raptor. They failed to put a great roster around Chris Bosh, and they had to pay the price for it. But something interesting happened. The Raptors had drafted Demar Derozan, a player who was a highly athletic wing and showed a lot of promise from out of USC. So Demar Derozan was drafted in the 2009-2010 NBA season, and that was Chris Bosh's last year on the Toronto Raptors. And they let him go because they were rebuilding, and he signed with the Miami Heat. So now we move on to the next stage of the Toronto Raptors, and that is the Demar Derozan's era. In the 2009-2010 NBA season, DeMar showed a lot of promise. He averaged only 8.6 points a game. That offseason, he improved his game a lot, and the next season, Andre Bargnani was actually the leading scorer on the team. He averaged over 19 points a game, and DeMar DeRozan had a great sophomore season. He averaged over 17 points a game. And the Raptors, the main reason why this is because they hired Dwayne Casey, the new coach of the Toronto Raptors. And for years now, he's been really famous for having one of the best development systems in the NBA. If it wasn't for him, I don't think half the players on the Toronto Raptors would be as good as they are today without Dwayne Casey's development program. For Dwayne, though, he was mostly an assistant coach, and for a short time, he was head coach of the Minnesota Timberwolves. And of course, they hired Masai Ujiri as the GM, who proved out he could put a winning roster together. Another player that was supposed to be part of the Raptors' process was Ed Davis, but he didn't really fit in the Raptors' plans. In the 2012-13 NBA season, for the Raptors, might have been the most important season for the rebuilding process. The Raptors had acquired Kyle Lowry from the Houston Rockets in exchange for forward Gary Forbes and a protected future first-round pick. They also drafted Jonas Valanciunas, whose value was so high that the Oklahoma City Thunder offered to trade him for James Harden. They drafted Terrence Ross, a guy who tied Vince Carter's record for most points scored in a game. They also had Rudy Gay alongside DeMar DeRozan, who was really becoming one of the best players in the league as a shooting guard. These guys that next season played absolutely amazing. They won 48 games, and they, from that point on, didn't miss the playoffs at all. In 2014-15 NBA season, they won 49 games, but they got swept in the first round. In the 2015-16 NBA season, though, this was the best year for the DeMar DeRozan era. He was an all-star alongside Kyle Lowry, who was an all-star, and the Raptors won 56 games. They added another player to their core, Norman Powell, out of the second round. This Raptors team was good enough to make it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. that was a really big jump for them because last year they only made it to the first round in the Demar Derozan era, and that was the highest he ever gotten. And they ended up going 6 games with the Cleveland Cavaliers, which wasn't really bad. In that 2016 NBA draft, the Raptors selected another player part of their core to this day, Pascal Siakam, who is now, of course, one of the best players on their team. They also had traded for Serge Ibaka, another guy part of their core, who was a good player on a contending team. The Raptors also picked up another player part of their core today, Fred VanVleet. But then again, the Raptors lost to the Cavs that next year, getting swept. That offseason, the Raptors drafted another player, OG Anunoby. He's a great defender. He's still very young and has a lot of room to grow still in his NBA career. The next season, by far, is the best season for the Toronto Raptors and Demar Derozan era. The Raptors, they ended up winning 59 games. Really, that was because Demar Derozan sacrificed his game to help the other players in the Raptors. Kyle Lowry was playing extremely well. And these Raptors, they didn't look like the same old Raptors who were constantly getting eliminated by LeBron James. But once again, they got swept in the second round by LeBron. And that LeBron team didn't have Kyrie Irving on it at all. It was just him and Kevin Love. And the Raptors, they had the better team. And from that point on, Dwayne Casey had been the Raptors coach for 7 years. And he was fired. And he was replaced by his assistant coach, Nick Nurse, a guy who has had really high expectations coming into this season. As well, the Raptors, they wanted to actually compete for NBA championships. So Masai Ujiri wanted to make the Raptors go up to another level. So they ended up trading for Danny Green and Kawhi Leonard, trading away DeMar DeRozan to the San Antonio Spurs. And now the Raptors are going to the NBA Finals. Something that was seen as something that could go really bad for the Raptors. Trading for Kawhi Leonard ended up being one of the greatest decisions that they ever made in their franchise. Funny part is Kawhi Leonard has already proven that he's really the best player to ever play for the Toronto Raptors in just his one season. But finally, after years of not being consistent at all and managing to lose their star players, the Raptors could possibly still keep Kawhi Leonard, and they're going to the NBA Finals. Now we will just have to see what happens when they go up against the Warriors. If you made it this far, then you obviously loved the video, so don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for the channel to help support my channel so we could grow and do something really special here. I hope you guys have a great day. Cue that outro.